He's a star defenseman for the New Orleans Saints, but there's more to him than just football. In an exclusive interview, NFL linebacker DEMARIO Davis discusses his career, his faith, and an issue near and dear to his heart. And later, award-winning actor, philanthropist, and author of the new memoir, Grateful American, Gary Sinise, talks about the book and serving our nation's military men and women. And Chris Lewis, the son of a Hollywood legend, talks about his late father's legacy and his own work on behalf of the disabled at the American Wheelchair Mission. A Special World Over begins right now.
Now, from Washington, D.C., Raymond Arroyo.
A warm welcome to all of you joining us in the United States and the world over for Give the Voice. It's sinus season. DEMARIO Davis, Gary Sinise, and Chris Lewis are all straight ahead. If you'd like to comment on tonight's show, send me a tweet. I'm at Raymond Arroyo. I'll be live tweeting throughout. First, here's an important story from the world over, one we've been following for you for years now. The body of Bishop Fulton J. Sheen should be moved to a new shrine in Peoria, Illinois. That's the unanimous ruling of a New York appeals court. On Tuesday, the court instructed the trustees of St. Patrick's Cathedral to permit the removal of Sheen's body. In June, diocesan officials in New York announced their decision to appeal a previous ruling by the Superior Court of New York in favor of Joan Sheen Cunningham. That's Archbishop Sheen's niece. She had petitioned the court to move her uncle's body to Peoria as a necessary part of his cause for canonization. The tug-of-war over Sheen's body dates back to 2002, when the Diocese of Peoria announced it would pursue his cause for canonization after the Archdiocese of New York declined to do so. This is the third time that the New York court system has ruled in Joan Sheen Cunningham's favor. The Archdiocese of New York says it disagrees with the most recent ruling and is considering yet another appeal. My first guest just wrapped up his first season as a linebacker for the NFC Southern Division champs, the New Orleans Saints. At 6'2", 250 pounds, he's a fearsome presence on the gridiron, but there is much more to his story than what you see on the field. I spoke to him recently at CPAC, the Conservative Political Action Conference here in Washington. We talked about his career, his faith, and his most recent work on behalf of criminal justice reform. Here's my interview with DEMARIO Davis. Now, I have a confession to make before we start. Here at CPAC, you know, they don't like you to wear T-shirts, but if I were going to wear a T-shirt, this is the one I was going to wear. I am a proud member of the Ewtn Nation, so to have DEMARIO here, just so you know, DEMARIO Davis, this last season, and I was in the Superdome for a lot of these games, he had the #1 tackling record in the NFL. More sacks, more than 100 tackles. An incredible player. But he's so much more than that. And today we want to talk about really one of the passions of your life, DEMARIO, which is criminal justice reform. Tell people a little bit about your story. When you were in 10th grade, something happened. What happened?
Well, it was where I lived at. My mom had me when she was 16 years old, and so the environment that I grew up in was filled with drugs, gangs, clubs, and I got involved in a lot of that. And by the time I got to college, and though I had a scholarship, my first year in college, I was arrested and went to jail for shoplifting and stealing groceries out of Walmart. And when I went to jail, I realized that I had a $10,000 bond, and I didn't have $10,000 to pay, so I didn't know what was going to happen. But my coach paid my way, and I was able to get out of jail and not spend that time, you know, pre-trial leading up to my court date in jail. And then when I got to the league and started to spend time in the criminal justice reform space and realized that people are going to jail simply because they can't pay the bill, and they're spending 7, 8, months in jail, sometimes years in jail without even having a court date because the system is so backed up. I realized that I easily could have been a statistic had my coaches not stepped in and paid that. I couldn't pay the bill. My mom couldn't pay it. We didn't have that type of money, but because I was an athlete, I was able to not go to jail.
Give people a sense, you know, we all think, well, this doesn't affect me. Pre-trial incarceration, that couldn't affect me at all. I was stunned when I started doing research on this. You have rapists, you have child molesters, you have murderers who are set free in the pre-trial period, but people who shoplift, engage in nonviolent crimes, they are often incarcerated, sometimes for a month, awaiting trial or more. What's the cost to us as a people, financially and otherwise?
Well, you got to realize it's going to fix the taxpayers tremendously. I'll give you a story about a grandmother in San Antonio who stole $105 worth of clothes to put clothes on the back of her grandkids, was arrested and spent 3 months in jail because she had a $150,000 bond that she could not pay. You think about how that's going to affect those children tremendously. So for that crime, because she couldn't pay it, she spent 3 months in jail. But you just talked about the serious crimes, far more serious than that, who people are able to get out of jail immediately because they have the funds to get out. But that grandmother spending that time cost the taxpayers on average $3,000, additional $3,000. For pre-trial last year, we paid $13.6 billion in taxes for pre-trial, because there are 40% of our nation that's locked up. The most incarcerated country in the world is pre-trial, and 9 out of 10 of those people who are in jail pre-trial are because cash bail.
I was stunned when I learned just this week, because I do a lot of work, as DEMARIO does, with illiteracy, with children. Do you know it costs in California almost $130,000 per inmate per year to incarcerate them? For juveniles, it jumps up to more than $180,000. That comes out of our tax dollars annually, and that's just one person.
One person.
What is the answer here? I know the American Conservative Union has been supporting something like these freedom, bail organizations that would be community-based, so that, let's back up a moment. Tell people about the financial incentives that are at play in the system today to actually jail people and the bail lobbyists. Tell us about that and the effect it has.
Well, yeah, to speak a little bit to both of what you said, number one, you got to think about the school-to-prison pipeline. So they're going into the schools and looking at the 4th grade reading level and deciding just how many prisons we want to build based on this the reading level of 4th graders. So at the same time, they could actually, for me to send my child to a private school, one of the best private schools, is going to be about $20,000 a year. Right. So you're thinking about $180,000 to hold somebody in prison versus $20,000 to just build a school that was big enough to facilitate these children and enhance the reading level, which you would think would be the right thing to do, right?
Yeah.
Sounds too much, it makes too much sense.
All right.
But when you talk about the bail system, when we go and fight these legislative bills in California and New York, speaking of that, there's a bill trying to get passed right now that the legislators are trying to figure out they want to do criminal justice reform around cash bail. Yeah. The people who are fighting against this are the bail bondsmen and the prosecutors, the people who benefit from sending people to jail. We have a user-friendly system in New Orleans, where the judge, the prosecutor, and the defender are all incentivized to send people to jail. They all get paid based on how many people are in jail. How is that going to affect the person that's standing before the judge? Yeah. Nobody here has a reason not to send this person to jail. Actually, they make more money by this person going to jail. So that makes the defender less likely to defend them, the judge less likely to declare innocent, and the prosecutor to ask for the harshest punishment.
And the taxpayer's left with the bill.
Exactly.
In perpetuity. I mean, the other problem here is the human capital lost. I mean, we have the innovation, the intensity, the creativity of individuals who aren't given a second chance. And again, we're talking about nonviolent offenders here. What are you hearing? There seems to be a movement. We saw President Trump move a criminal justice reform bill this past year, something that has not been done. Administration after administration promised it. Congress after Congress promised it. This first step, which is what it's called, moved forward this past year. Your thoughts on what that means? There seems to be a consensus on right and left that we have to do something about criminal
I
justice?
think the momentum is starting to move in the right direction. I think there are great ideas to be able to replicate. You look at D.C., it does have a no cash bail system. The crime is definitely not higher here than anywhere else. I mean, you think the justice system is designed to make our community safer. You look at Philadelphia. An op-ed was printed today in the USA Today talking about Larry Krasner and what he's doing as a prosecutor in Philadelphia. 25 cases where he chose to do no cash bail. And that's about 61% of the cases that came to Philadelphia, and these were nonviolent offenses, including drug offenses and prostitution. And actually, the violent crimes decreased by 5% in 2018, and the crime rate did not go up.
There was another study, and this is fascinating, that I came across just in my own research. What happens to a nonviolent offender when you hold them pre-trial, okay? When you incarcerate them for a day, 2 days, 3 days. Here's what they found. 2 to 3 days incarceration, they're 39% more likely to be charged with another crime. You keep them from 4 to 7 days, again, in a pre-trial incarceration, they're 50% more likely to be arrested a second time. What does that tell you, and what can be done about this?
That's a tremendous tragedy, and I would even up that even more.
Really?
The death rate goes up in jail, and are more likely for our pretrial people. A third of the people that die in jail die within the first week. Also, 3/4 of the deaths that happen in our country in jail are pretrial inmates. So it's almost like a death sentence to send somebody to jail for that extent of period of time without them being convicted of being innocent or guilty.
And we're literally talking about millions and millions and millions of dollars in pretrial incarceration. We're not talking about not penalizing people who are guilty of heinous crimes. That's not what we're talking about here. But that pretrial period, if you're dealing with a non-violent offender, is it worth it? In Cuyahoga County in Ohio, just Cuyahoga, $42 million they spent last year. We've spent $13 billion nationally incarcerating people pre-trial. What do you suggest? What should be the legislative step? What are you asking people to do to reform this bail and pre-trial incarceration area?
I think it looks different a little bit everywhere, but ultimately we should be trying to move away from cash bail as a whole. If we feel like somebody's going to be a threat to society, don't recommend bail. So for those people we do have very violent offenders and people who are very scary who need to be locked up, just simply ask that they don't have bail. But for our nonviolent offenders, you're pretty much making it a profit-based system. You know, it's all about, do you have the money or do you not have the money? That depends on if you're going to stay in jail or not. Also, the bail system is designed to incentivize people to come back. What we've found out statistically is people who get out of jail on cash bail are 94% with no cash bail, or 94% likely to return to court.
The other thing I think a lot of people miss because either they don't see it in their own family or they haven't heard the stories. When you take someone and incarcerate them, particularly if it's a head of a household, the sole grandmother who's raising children, what impact does that have on the family? I mean, you yourself, your father was a vet. He was away serving in the Middle East. And do you think that caused you to turn to mentors who were perhaps not the best mentors at the time? And do you see a pattern of that?
Oh, all the time. If you look in the communities where we raised, a lot of the men are not in the household for various reasons. So the young boys, I believe very much so that it takes a man to teach a boy how to be a man. And when they're not around, the boys are just going to look to the older guys in society, and the older guys in our society were drug dealers, gangbangers, and whatnot. And so that's kind of who we followed and tried to emulate, and that's what took us down a bad path. So we have to think about that we're actually making our communities less safer when we take people and lock them up for that extent of time for nonviolent offenses, because they're going to be gone from their family. It's going to drastically push them into even more poverty, because if my mom, had I not had a coach, my mom would have tried everything she could to get me out of jail on bail, which would have forced her to go to a bail bondsman who would have made her put her house up, maybe put her car up, and just kind of locked her into some type of slave type system, something that she couldn't pay back. And when she couldn't pay back, she was indebted to the bail bondsman, which would have pushed her into even more poverty.
Yeah. We've got to do something about this bail system. It's not, but again, the bail bond lobbyists are, every time the reform moves forward, they sort of seize in. But it's not good for us as a people. It's not good for the community. It's certainly not good for children. I want to talk for a moment about your Devoted Dreamers Foundation. Tell people a little bit about, in your personal life, when you come out of prison, you're at the, well, you weren't there for long, but you were caught up in the system, you come out, you're at Arkansas State, you meet a pastor there who really changed your life.
Yes, very much so.
Tell me what happened there.
So I had the opportunity to be discipled by our team chaplain, and a little bit after when I was in jail for the 3 days that I was in there, I just started to really wrestle and understand my life isn't going the direction I wanted to go. And he just started spending time with me day by day, asking questions about what I thought about life. And he introduced me to the Bible and started to teach me about a relationship with Christ. He walked me into a relationship with Christ, and it changed my life and the perspective that I had of life tremendously. You know, no longer was my life about glorifying myself, but it was about living a life worthy of glorifying the King. And I watched him, and I watched how it was amazing. My whole life I had never seen a two-parent household and be led under God, and so I watched him and how he raised his family, and it inspired me to do the same. I've been married now 7 years, 3 amazing kids, and they all raised in the household of Christ, and it changed tremendously. And so had I never got that second chance, my life could look totally different, but because I had that second chance, and that's the importance that we need to make sure that we're doing with the rest of society, instead of throwing people away and locking away the key, we need to be making sure we're trying our best to give them second chances, because you never know what kind of positivity can come out of that.
And connection, I love in your story, connections, mentorship. We can't give up on anybody. And one of the beautiful things, you know, I live in New Orleans, and if you have not seen this guy play, I was in the Superdome this last season. You all are going to the Super Bowl next year. I'm just saying it now. You heard it here first at CPAC, okay? At the end of every major play, DeMario does something that you all perhaps have not seen. But watch closely next season, because I think you're going to see a lot of it. I mean, this guy led in tackles last season. He'll do it again. Show people what you do at the end of a major play. There's a gesture you do. Show it to. I know it's a little awkward.
Well, a lot of times, if you haven't seen it, what I'll do is, after a sack or a big play or an interception, what I'll usually do is just go and where I find a camera, you'll see me do that. And it's a very simple pose, but a lot of believers.
Tell people what it means.
A lot of people have seen that, you know, and a lot of believers would know what that means, but because they've seen that pose so much. But it's simply Jesus on the cross. And we're called as believers to be imitators of Christ, take up our cross daily. And that's just a representation that every big play is not for me, but it's about glory above. And so that's why I do it, to make sure that I'm glorifying the person who's responsible for saving my life and the Lord of my life. So.
Okay, we only have a beautiful, I mean, it's incredible witness. In our final minutes, I've got to ask you, that I was in the Dome during that Steelers game. There was a fumble at the end, near the end of the game. This guy recovers it and shut the Steelers down. Then you all go to the championship. And there was that missed call that every member of the Ewtn Nation is still, thank you, my people. We're all Ewtn Nation today. The pain, and that was tough. That was a tough moment. The NFL, it seems, is not going to reform those misplays or allow any replays or reviews. Is that a mistake?
I think a lot goes into it. You always have to be able to see both sides of it, because, you know, that was a very unfortunate play that happened to us, because we do feel like it changed the trajectory of it and a trajectory of what could have happened next. But you do have to realize that a lot of games will be affected by the rule change, which it could ultimately slow down the pace of the game.
I get it.
So you do have to understand that there are two perspectives. I think as far as what happened to us, it was a beautiful opportunity for us to take a negative situation and turn it into a positive. You look at Drew Brees' response to the entire city about, hey, we're not going to be bitter about this. We're not going to be resentful. We're going to actually turn this negative into a positive. We're going to use it as fuel and motivation to come back next year. And I think that's where we have to be as a society. It's a lot of bad things happening around us, but it's very easy to take a negative situation and turn it into a positive situation. Life is 10% what happened to you and 90% how you respond to it.
I agree. Drew Brees and this team, they have such grace, and I have to tell you, I always think, I think I should write a book about this. The country could learn so much about not only race relations, but what it means to be civil in society if you spent a week in New Orleans. Now, look, we have crime, we have our difficulties, but nowhere do you see a community, and I think it's partly because people, you had 9 separate races that came together, married, intermingled, shared recipes, our music, all of that is a bit of the gumbo that makes our city. When the Saints lost that championship game, the following, when they had the Super Bowl, they had a boycott in New Orleans. So people took to the streets, hundreds of thousands of people, the whole city was out in black and gold. They had spontaneous parades, cookouts, black, white, Hispanic, everybody coming together. It was such a beautiful moment. It was better than the Super Bowl. And that could only happen in New Orleans. I want you to tell people very quickly before we run out of time, tell me about your Devoted Dreamers Foundation that you founded and the MBA that you are pursuing now as an NFL player. Why did you make that decision to pursue your master's in business?
I think one of my mentors just talked about the degrees of separation and differentiation, and understanding that, you know, we all can be on a level playing field, but if you just continue to climb up, you can differentiate yourself away from the people around you. And so that just was another reason and another goal to chase. As long as you live, I think you should never stop chasing goals, never stop chasing new dreams, and that's what, you know, kind of leads into Devoted Dreamers Foundation, which I have, and it's encouraging these kids who have these dreams that you can attain your dreams if you just believe and move towards them. And so what we have is a mentorship program. We have various programs throughout. We have a 7-week summer camp where we enhance kids spiritually, mentally, physically. We have gospel conferences where we take 250 kids in and just share the gospel with them and listen to worship music all day and try to teach them the gospel and give them an opportunity to come to Christ like I did. When I leave here, I'll be going back to my 7-on-7 travel elite team, where it's a mentorship program. We focus on academia. We focus on mentorship and dealing with peer pressure, drugs, alcohol, sex. And we also have a chaplain like I had come in and speak to them and share the gospel on top of playing football. And our main message to them are, you're not football players, you're influencers. Teaching them when they go in their classroom, they're an influencer. When they go to their friend's house and they go to parties, they're an influencer. So understanding that you can influence society in a positive way, you can influence society in a negative way, and taking that stigma of just being an athlete first and a person second away from.
What do you want? I love that. I love that you're giving back. That you're taking the time to give back. There are a lot of players who, there are a lot of players who do a lot of good like this. They have foundations. They reach out to the community. There are others who could care less. I love that you're the former. What do you want people here to take away from, before we leave, that from this criminal justice reform idea that you have and where you think the reform needs to take place? What do you want them to go back to their communities?
I would just say this: when it comes to people, when we remember people, we don't remember people for what they do. We remember people for what they did for us. And so when you measure somebody, to whom much is given, much is required. So what you have talent, you have treasure, you have resources, you have time. How you use those to help those around you is how people are going to remember you. And so as a nation, you have to think about nation in the same way. What makes our nation great really is the idea of what we do for everyone, not just what we do for ourselves. So as we become this great nation, or are this great nation, if we don't take all those resources to make sure it's extended to everybody, we're not being great. That's what makes us great as people. That's what makes us great as a nation.
You can find out more about DeMario Davis's Devoted Dreamers Foundation at devoteddreamers.org. Go Saints. Who dat? My next guest was nominated for an Oscar for his role as Lieutenant Dan in the 1994 blockbuster Forrest Gump. He's an Emmy winner, a family man, musician, and philanthropist working on behalf of our nation's fighting men and women. He's also the author of a brand new memoir, Grateful American, a journey from self to service. Please welcome back to the program, Gary Sinise. Welcome back, Gary. Great to see you, as always.
Thank you.
And to see you on our turf here. Why do you subtitle the book A Journey from Self to Service?
Well, I didn't know what the book was going to be called when I started to write it, but as I started to pour through it, these recurring themes started to come out: gratitude, appreciation, and I realized that this memoir kind of tracked my life through the time where I was focused on this singular sort of acting thing that I was doing and building a theater company and, the things that were around my small world. and that it evolved into this broader mission story of service to others, which I'm very much involved in now because of my foundation, the Gary Sinise Foundation, and everything. So it really is. That's exactly what the book is. I am a grateful American, and it is a journey following this road from kind of a self-focus to a broader service focus.
You open the book and you title the prologue "Stunned," and it's about a seminal event that happened about 25 years ago that confirmed you in what's become your life's mission, your work. Tell me about that moment.
Yeah, I wanted to start the book with something and then kind of travel back. So I started with a kind of a pivotal moment, an important moment that sort of really stunned me in a way when I walked in to the Disabled American Veterans National Convention 25 years ago this summer. And they had seen Forrest Gump. It had just come out about a month before, and they'd seen Lieutenant Dan. And this is an organization that advocates for, they might have 2 million members that are all wounded veterans. And they invited me to their national convention. I walked in, and I was so emotional to receive their acknowledgement. They wanted to acknowledge me for playing a disabled veteran in what they consider to be a positive way. And 2,000 wounded veterans cheering you on, that was very emotional. I never forgot it.
You talk in the book also about your grandfather's service. You take us way back in the book. And you had family who were veterans, your wife's family as well. Tell me a sense of how that laid the groundwork for this concern and heart you have for military men and women and their families.
Well, it's funny, when I was a kid, my dad was in the Navy in the early 50s, and I was born in 55. He got out of the Navy in 55. I was conceived here at Anacostia on the naval base there, and that's where my dad was stationed. He was working in the film lab as a photo mate, is what they called him, and that's where he learned the film business. He moved. My mom went back. She left. She was pregnant. She went back to Chicago, said, I'm going to have the baby there. He got out of the Navy about a week after I was born. And then he went into the film business in Chicago, started working in the film business. His dad had served in World War I, and his 2 older brothers served in World War II. So I've got this family on my side of the family of veterans, but I never really talked to them too much about their service when I was a young kid. It was really when I met my wife, and she introduced me to her brothers who had served in Vietnam in the U.S. Army. Her sister was in the Army. Her sister married a Vietnam veteran who was in the Army for 22 years, combat medic in Vietnam. They were the ones that sort of, started to talk to me about military service and what it was like to be a Vietnam veteran, serve in the jungles, and then come home to a nation that really didn't treat them very well. And they had to kind of recline into the shadows a bit. I felt very badly for our Vietnam veterans, and so in the early 80s, I just started to do some things in Chicago to support them in different ways. And that sort of planted the seeds a little bit for what would happen in the 90s when I had the opportunity to audition for Forrest Gump and then play a Vietnam veteran. I very much wanted to do that because of the military veterans in my own family. And that led me to start working with our wounded, and it all turned. There was a turning point. There's a chapter in the book called Turning Point, which is the September 11th attack. That was a real turning point for me, and I started moving into the service work that I haven't stopped.
No, it arrested people who were not there at the time. Don't remember what that moment did to the entire country. I mean, it was a shock to the whole system of the country. But
question.
to those who were who had first responders in their family or were in any way involved with the victims of 9/11 or the New York scene, it became very real. The threat, the danger, and how fragile the freedom we took for granted was.
I write about that in the book, the fear that I had after that event. I mean, it was terrifying. To watch those buildings come down, watch people fall from those buildings, watch, you know, what was happening in the Pentagon and Shanksville and all the, and then remember shortly after that, all of a sudden anthrax is floating through the mail and everything. I mean, it was crazy. It was a very paranoid time. Everybody was on edge. Yeah. And I was on edge, and my heart was broken. I just wanted to do something. And I remember, I think I told you this one time. Yeah. Friday after the Tuesday of September 11th was a national day of prayer. George Bush said, everybody, we need to do something together as a country. I want Friday to be a national day of prayer. The churches were packed across the country. I went to our little church, little Catholic church, and there was no room to sit. I mean, I was standing against the wall with my family. Every space was filled. And I remember coming out of that feeling that, you know, I mean, it was comforting, but I needed to do something beyond that. And I heard this calling, this message that came to me about service and the healing power of service work. And that made a lot of sense to me. So I started raising my hand, you know, for the USO and, you know, what can I do for your military charity? Can I come and raise money for you? Can I draw some attention to you? Do some PSAs, whatever it is. Play concerts for the troops. Yeah. And it just started to go like this. And there's a period in that service history where you look at it and it's like I was gone every weekend doing something. And I was shooting a television show at the same time. So it was a crazy period, but I was getting so much out of making an impact by letting people know that I cared about them and I appreciated them. And the war got worse, remember. There was a time where Walter Reed was just filled to the gills with wounded, and they didn't know where to put them. There were so many. And during that period of time, I was going to the hospitals all the time, meeting a lot of the families of our wounded, meeting our wounded service members, trying to come up with some ideas in ways to help them. And so I started raising money. I started getting into home building, where we would build specially adapted homes for our wounded. Incredible. And it all manifested itself into the creation of the Gary Sinise Foundation, which is toward the end of the book. You see the service journey into this full-time nonprofit that is devoted to serve and honor the needs of our military men and women and first responders. And we're getting great things done at the Gary Sinise Foundation.
No, I've seen it up close. And I want to talk about it in a moment. You get into your career as well, and I want to back up a little bit. In high school, and this I didn't know, in high school, you were not exactly the straight arrow that people think you are today, Gary Sinise. I mean, you were doing pot, you were selling it, a little scrape with the law after you signed on to be in West Side Story. What happened there? Where did this acting bug come from during that period?
Well, I had a lot of trouble as a kid. I never learned properly, I don't think, how to read and write. I mean, it's just, I've gotten better over the years.
Yes,
obviously,
you have.
I wrote a book.
You've written a book now.
My high school teacher is amazed. You know, this kid wrote a book. That's incredible. You could put words together.
You see that? They make sense.
And when she first met me, I was just bumbling around, and you know, I was having trouble. I tell this story in the book where we moved from town to town a little bit, right in those years where you're developing a lot of friends and you're making friends, and then all of a sudden we uprooted and moved, and I had to make new friends, and that was a struggle. I played in rock bands. I got into trouble with a lot of things that I write about a little bit in the book, because I do hope that somebody who might be going through a similar thing can see that there is light at the end of the tunnel, and if you can turn yourself around. And I was lucky. I was, in some ways, I don't know. I happened to be standing in a hallway, and this drama teacher walked down the hall when I was a sophomore in high school, and she told me to come and audition for West Side Story because I looked like a gang member, and she thought I'd be good in the show. And so I did. I went and auditioned, and I got in the show. And all of a sudden I discovered here's this aimless kid who's really, really troubled, having a lot of trouble adjusting. And all of a sudden I found this community of kids that I loved, and I just loved doing the play, and that's all I wanted to do. So I just auditioned for every play I could after that. And you know, as soon as I got out of high school, I started a theater. I wanted to keep doing it.
Now, not any theater. You start the Steppenwolf Theater Company, which is now this iconic institution in Chicago. But
We were kids.
Yeah, in the beginning, it's you and Laurie Metcalf and John Malkovich. You're pals, and you're doing these shows together. What was it like in those early years? I mean, you all were learning at the same time, I imagine.
Yeah, in West Side Story.
And your wife, Moira, who was also
She
a
was
part of
an
it.
early
Yeah.
member, yeah, 1976. In West Side Story, the guy who was playing Tony, the lead. You know, I was one of the chorus guys.
Yeah.
I was a shark, you know.
Pepe.
Yeah, Pepe the Shark. And the guy who was playing the lead was Jeff Perry. And Jeff and I became best friends. And he was very different than me. He was a guy who carried a million books around, and he had glasses and read Chekhov and Stanislavski and stuff. I didn't know what any of that was. And I was just a rock and roll kid, you know. But we really connected, and we hit it off. And after high school, I just wanted to keep doing plays. So I started this little company with some of the high school kids. And Jeff had gone off to college to Illinois State University, and I told him about this. And so for his summer break, he came up to do a play with this little community company, a play by Tom Stoppard called Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead. And he had made very good friends with another guy at ISU named Terry Kinney, who was another great actor. So he said, I'll bring Terry with me, and he'll be in it too. And so Terry came up, and the three of us really bonded during that experience. And we said, you know, when you guys get out of college, we're going to pick this up again and do something with it. So a couple years later, they get out of college, and we find a space in the basement of a closed-down Catholic school. I went to the priest, and I said, I'm a little kid. Can we have your basement and put on some plays? And he said, sure. And, you know, it was closed down. They weren't doing anything with us. He said he'd give it to us for $1 a year, for just a write-off. And so we built an 88-seat theater in this basement of a Catholic school in Highland Park, Illinois. And we recruited 6 more people, and Laurie Metcalf, Moira Harris, John Malkovich, Alan Wilder, H.E. Bacchus, and Nancy Evans. And we became the original 9 members of Steppenwolf. And from there, it just kept growing and growing and growing. Then we moved into the city of Chicago and built our own building, and now we're about to break ground on another building. And you know, it's 45 years old now, that theater.
Unbelievable. Did you ever expect Lieutenant Dan to do what it's done, and why has it resonated in the way it has all these years later? I mean, generations now, we're talking about multiple generations now, that see you as Lieutenant Dan, and that gives you a certain credibility in addition to your work in the veteran community.
You know, I don't know. I mean, can you? You can think of a few movies that are constantly. You see them every year. They're always on television. It's a Wonderful Life.
Yeah.
It's on every year,
Right.
and new
Wizard of Oz,
generations
yeah.
watch it. There's
very
a few
few.
of them. Forrest Gump seems like it's on television all the time. Somebody is always texting me, hey, I'm watching Gump on TV right now. And it seems like it's never quite left the consciousness in some way. So new generations of kids are seeing Forrest Gump. I'll go and play for these concerts on military bases. There'll be 5,000 people out there. They're all screaming Lieutenant Dan at me, and I'll ask them, you know, how many people here have seen Forrest Gump? And everybody cheers. And then I'll say, is there anybody over 10 who hasn't seen that movie? And you know, it's very quiet. Nobody said it. People, I don't know if they're just embarrassed or what, but it seems like everybody's seen the film. And so it's always there. When I started going out for the troops, I hadn't had CSI New York yet, so I wasn't on television every week, and I had done some movies, but I was still kind of the guy, you know, the guy who played this guy and the guy who played that guy. People didn't know my name, but they knew Lieutenant Dan, and they recognized me from that. That's why I named my band after the character.
Yeah.
I figured, well, if they don't know my name, they'll know Lieutenant.
They'll know Lieutenant Dan, or they'll figure it out, and they have. Tell me, when I covered the Snowball Express this past Christmas, it blew me away. I have to tell you, it's not at all what I expected to see. I thought we'd have a bunch of kids having a good time at Disney World, but it really is. It's a therapeutic moment. You tried to explain it, but you have to experience it and see it. And what goes through your mind when you see these people discovering each other in their shared pain and in the pain that they alone understand, these families of veterans who've lost their lives? And what do you say to them?
Well, it's humbling, you know. And it's moving, and I just embrace them and let them know that I love them and that I care about them and that they're not alone. That's the thing about this particular event. When we bring all the kids together and the families, these are kids that live all over the country in little towns or wherever it is. They might be the only military family in that town, and they lost their mom or their dad in military service, and that child is going through something that none of the other kids are going through.
Right.
But when they come together with this event that we do every year for these children, and they meet all these over 1,000 other kids that have all gone through this grieving of losing, you know, a mom or a dad in military service, they really feel like they're in a community, like they're in a family, like they're not alone, and they make lasting friendships. I mean, these kids give each other their numbers, and then they go off to the little towns and they stay in touch with each other.
And they meet up the following year.
Oh, it's a network of friends that are made.
I'm going to show people this little clip of video that your foundation released this week. It went viral, and it is people thanking you, being grateful for your work. Watch this.
Thanks, Lieutenant Dan.
I just want to thank you
For everything that you do.
and your foundation helped me and my family recover from the devastating Tubbs fire. Not only me and my family, but also hundreds of other firefighters.
Give me a reaction to that when you saw all those people thanking you.
Well, first it was a shock because I was surprised by it. My team kind of pulled a fast one on me, and they were sneaking around behind my back, like getting everybody to send in videos, and they were putting it all together, and they had it perfectly planned to show it to me on the day that my book launched. And so we're on this book tour, and you know, we're in the hotel room. We're about to leave to go do some more interviews, and I'm like in a hurry and everything. They made me sit down.
We
and
need you to
watch
watch this.
Yeah, I'm like, what's going on? What's going on? So they made me watch it, and the first one up is Jay Leno, and he starts talking to Gary. Hey, Gary. You know, I'm like, what's this? And then Ron Howard comes on, and then another, and it keeps going on. And there are first responders there, and there are military folks from around the country and overseas, and there are Gold Star children, and some of our wounded that we've done houses for.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking about it, and I get choked up just thinking about it, because it was very, very touching and very moving and overwhelming. I mean,
Yeah, no, it was a beautiful.
just to see that people did that for me. I mean, I'm a grateful American.
Yeah, well, and people are grateful for you. I mean, the response I saw on social media was unbelievable. I got to ask you this before I let you go, because you talk about it in the book. It seems as if, and you told me moments ago, this is really a calling from God for you, and that's how you see it, this work you're doing.
I feel called to service for sure. And there were these key moments along the way, you know. And I talk about that a little in the book, that moment where our priest on the Friday after September 11th attacks, everybody is just in so much pain. You know,
Yeah.
people are just crying through every day.
Yep.
You know, recalling the images that we all saw on television and the things that are happening. Everybody was fearful, and I remember the priest getting up, and the first thing he said was, "This was a tough week." And he was right on the money. You know, everybody, it was a tough week for everybody.
Yeah.
It was a tough week for me, and it continued to be tough. And I continued to be in pain. And something I got out of that homily that day was that service is a great healer. Serving others is a great healer, and we should all pull together to do something positive for somebody else, to help them through this terrible time. and having veterans in my family, and having been involved with the DAV and the disabled veterans and everything, and remembering what it was like for our Vietnam veterans to go off to war and then come back and not have services provided for them, not have the country embrace them and welcome them home. They didn't even get a welcome home. And then seeing our deploying troops go to Afghanistan and Iraq and watching our nation start to divide itself in whether they supported the war or not, I felt terrible for our deploying service members, and I knew that was where my calling was going to be. I was going to be called to do this service work, to help them through this difficult time of deploying to the war zone in reaction to September 11th. And once I started, the healing began, and I could see the impact I was making, and I wanted to embrace every family member, every person that was deploying, every first responder that I could.
What's on the horizon for the foundation now? What's the next thing?
The foundation is growing. We're expanding our impact and our reach. I brought in some new team members that are helping lead the way. I mean, I put my acting career on hold. The last thing I did was December of 2016. So it's over 2 years that I've just poured myself into this work. And I think probably I've only worked 3.5 out of the last 8 years. And the rest of the time has been focused on this mission of building this foundation in hopes that we could create a lasting, reliable resource for the American people who want to support our defenders. If you go to GarySiniseFoundation.org, you can learn a ton of things about the great programs we have at the foundation and the people that we're impacting.
My next guest grew up among Hollywood royalty, the son of the late comic legend, my pal Jerry Lewis. He had a front row seat to a golden age of entertainment. I sat down with him recently to talk about his late father's legacy and his own vocation of bringing the gift of mobility to the disabled by founding the American Wheelchair Mission. Here's my exclusive interview with Chris Lewis. Chris, you really follow in your father's footsteps in a couple of ways, and I want to highlight the two that I know of. First of all, what's become a big part of your life's work, the American Wheelchair Mission. This really came from working with your dad all those years on the MDA telethon.
Absolutely.
Tell us about it.
Well, I started working on the MDA telethon when I was 14 years old. And a lot of people have said, don't you want to do what your dad did? And I said, well, I really kind of did. Just not the silly stuff, the stuff that really meant something, the stuff that touched me and touched my parents and our family, and just felt very natural.
And where did the first impulse for this notion of distributing wheelchairs to parts of the world and country that people didn't have? How many people lack wheelchairs? You'd think everybody who wants a wheelchair can get one.
The closest estimate we can come up with is about 100 million people in the world need a wheelchair, cannot afford one, and no other type of mobility device would help them.
Wow.
Yeah.
And you felt called to this particular need.
We weren't the only people doing it, but it's been done for quite a few years on a smaller basis. But since 2000, there have been some very inspired people that have gotten involved. The LDS Church was one of the first to get involved. And of course, we work with the Knights of Columbus and the Equestrian Order and all sorts of organizations. Caritas has been doing it for years, and they're our distribution partner in many countries. So it's something that just rang true with me when I heard about it and got involved in it, and I've been doing it 19 years now.
And working with people with special needs was really second nature after what you'd spent so much of your childhood and adulthood doing.
Absolutely, because that all inspires prayers, being thankful for my kids and their health. And prayer inspires thought, inspires action, and turns into answering prayers.
I want to talk about a few other things. You are here in the D.C. area because you just delivered the second shipment. This is like Smokey and the Bandit Part 2. You had to go first cross-country, now the second pass.
Yes.
What did you bring to the Library of Congress? You have been bringing bits of your father's legacy, really.
Yeah, my dad donated his entire film and television archive to the Library of Congress back in 2015. So the first shipment was most of the film much of the tape. The second one was the second half of all the tape, production papers, scrapbooks, photographs, proof sheets, things that pertain to the
creation of these
yeah,
classics.
but not just his films, but also all the audio tapes of his live performances and interviews and television.
Wow.
And so, yeah, it's so deep, it's going to take years for them to.
Wow. You recently released a box set of his 10 favorite films. What were they and why?
They were basically the films that he created himself the most, that were closest to him, the ones he directed. The Bellboy, his first directorial production, The Errand Boy, Cinderfella and The Nutty Professor and Family Jewels. And through Paramount Pictures, who we've had a wonderful relationship with for 50 years plus, they said there's still a segment of people who want to own the Jerry Lewis DVDs, and Walmart jumped on it, and they sold more of those than they did any of the other product that they had out in that quarter.
Wow.
And so they re-upped it, and we're doing it and hoping to spread it more overseas.
Now, to what do you attribute that? What do you think that, what does that audience need that they're answering there, and do you think he still speaks to?
Well, it's fun, it's funny, it's available to any audience. You don't have to worry about what's being said, what's being seen, and it doesn't matter what language you speak, because this crazy guy gets you to laugh no matter what he's saying or doing, or falling down, or...
I was stunned. 3,000 canisters you conveyed, film canisters, to the Library of Congress.
Yes.
It's a massive collection. What shocked you that you found among these papers, these films, that you didn't realize were there, or you didn't think you'd find?
Constantly being shocked,
Really?
actually, yes. The depth of what my dad kept. Anything that had to do with the creative process, he kept. He had Kinescopes made of all of his performances starting back in the 1940s. The library was actually saying, we don't have any of these shows. They didn't exist. They were only broadcast live. But he would call the American Kinescope Company and say, I want a copy for myself. So all of the Johnny Carson shows that he hosted for weeks at a time, we had Kinescopes. All 28 of the Martin Lewis Colgate comedy hours from 1950 to 55, he had the only copies. So it's a treasure trove for the library.
Well, are you planning any further releases? And explain to the audience how this works. Your father donated all of his films to the Library of Congress.
Yeah.
What about the copyright? Do you retain that?
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
so the family still retains that?
Yes.
Okay.
And we did some screenings of some of his films up at MoMA, at the Museum of Modern Art.
The Unknown Jerry, tell us about that.
Yeah, some of the films that he made himself. He was behind the camera a lot. He would have his friends over. Dean Martin, Tony Curtis, Janet Leigh, they would just be playing around.
These are kind of at-home productions with some of the biggest stars in the Hollywood
production,
galaxy.
sync sound, and we're in the process of restoring them now, basically, because they were only one copy, 16mm copies, that he showed through his projector 20, 30, 40 times. So now we've got the one only, and we're in the process of doing that with the Library of Congress, restoring them.
I saw a New York Times piece recently about really his unreleased film that has arrested so much attention globally. They've done documentaries on it at the BBC. This New York Times piece, I saw a Variety piece last year, and it's about The Day the Clown Cried, which is a film he shot, never released. I asked him about it when we spoke. I want you to watch this. The Day the Clown Cried?
No.
No, you have that one. You kept that back. We're not going to talk about that because I'm
You
tired
can.
of everybody and their dog have talked about it. I personally think I would love to see it because of your artistry, but there's such expectations now built about what's in that canister.
What was it you said about what I brought to it?
The artistry that you have shown throughout your work.
That's the problem. There was no artistry.
No?
No, and the work was bad.
So you didn't want people to see it?
The work wasn't even, as far as I'm concerned, my critique was it wasn't even something you should show to the public. That's how bad it turned out.
You say that this was very close to his heart, this film.
Yes.
Tell me about it. And is there a complete cut of this film?
Not to my knowledge. I don't believe there is a complete cut. We saw a work print back in the early 70s. I think that's all there was, because it was a co-production between a French, Swedish, and American company. And the producer from America ended up not paying the writer. My dad never had the rights to rewrite it. And it just fell apart. So the negative exists in probably 3 different countries. And nobody could finish it, even if they wanted to.
Really?
Yeah.
Because I know there are some interested. They rehabilitated an old unfinished Orson Welles movie.
Yes.
Netflix released it. Would you be interested in seeing something like that happen with The Day the Clown Cried?
Well, I think since you can talk about history, I think going back and looking at it from a historical standpoint would be very interesting. That I would think would be good. But since there's no way to get your hands on the actual negative, it was tied up in so much litigation, so many people lost money. When the New York Times or the LA Times articles came out, people were calling my dad's office, threatening him, if you do anything, release anything, we'll sue you in a second. And it's still, that's many years
It's still tied
later.
up in a lot of different rights. But the Library of Congress claims they have in their possession now, which you gave them, backstage images from associated. So kind of the behind the scenes
Yes.
of shooting the film, staging the film. Maybe that would make a documentary or something?
Actually, it would make a very
time?
good documentary if the person he had handed the camera to knew how to use it.
Oh no, it's all over the place. It's a mess.
Several 2,000-foot reels of color reversal film, and you see his shoes more than you see what's happening behind the camera.
When I was with your dad at the house in Vegas, he showed me clips of his live stage act from the 60s in Paris to, and I saw him later in Vegas as a kid with Sammy Davis on stage, which I knew you were involved in at the time. Any thought of releasing those live performances or a collection of those?
Yes, as a matter of fact, there are some that have been available in the past. HBO did one on Jerry and Sammy. We have several of the live performances that were released years ago back on videotape. And we have the raw footage from Australian performances that he did in '99 before he got sick.
Wow.
So that's kind of like untouched gems that we can go back and put something together.
Let's talk about your work now. I imagine there's a big hole in your heart. Well, I know there is, with the absence of your dad. You were so close to him, and as he told me when I asked him, what's your legacy? He said, that guy right there, and he pointed to you. And you are carrying that legacy forward. Do you feel a sense of, is it a burden? Is it a weight that you feel you have to carry that legacy forward?
Not a burden or a weight at all. It's an honor, a pleasure. My dad was many things, but the level of creativity that he attached to doing things right, he always found a way to do it right, and he taught me that. And so the legacy that I'm keeping alive is we're helping people who can't help themselves. We're answering people's prayers. He was the one who said, we're doing God's work on earth. That's the first time I heard it, is when he said it.
About MDA, the
Yes.
work at MDA
Yeah.
and the telethon.
And that it's amazing what you can accomplish if it doesn't matter who gets the credit. That was another one of his favorite sayings.
What's next for the American Wheelchair Mission? What would you like to see happen next?
Well, we have been delivering a lot of wheelchairs into the Christian families in the Middle East, working with the Caritas organizations in Jerusalem, Lebanon, Jordan. It's very frustrating. It's hard. It's hard to help these people. We're doing a lot in Vietnam. Caritas Vietnam, I think, is one of our best distribution partners in the world. But the need is enormous. It's just enormous. But the Knights of Columbus have been there for us, helping the American veterans who don't qualify for VA benefits or need an additional wheelchair. The Knights are there to supply them with it, and it's wonderful. There's more of that we can do. We'd like to get more people involved. Did you know there are retired priests and nuns who don't have wheelchairs?
No. Wow.
I had that discussion with Cardinal Dolan in New York, April of last year, and we have a program going on with the Knights in New York now where they're working to get wheelchairs to any priest, nun that needs them.
Wow.
Yeah.
Chris Lewis, thank you for being here. Thank you for all you do and for the joy that you continue to spread via your father's work and the good work you're doing with the Wheelchair Mission. It's
my pleasure.
It's incredible. Thank you. You can find out about Chris Lewis and his work at the American Wheelchair Mission at amwheelchair.org. That is all the time we have for now. Until next week, the show continues on Facebook and Twitter. Like me on Facebook. You can follow me on Twitter. Go ahead. The links are at raymondarroyo.com. Don't forget, I am giving away a couple of copies, actually 5 copies, of the Will Wilder 3, The Amulet of Power audiobook. All you have to do is send me a picture of you or your family reading the book. You can send it to Raymond at raymondarroyo.com or hit me up on Twitter or Instagram. And remember, you can get Will Wilder 3 at bookstores everywhere, including the EWTN Religious Catalog. Be sure to join us next week. We'll be scouting the world over for all that is seen and unseen. On behalf of the staff and crew of EWTN News, thank you for watching. I'm Raymond Arroyo from Washington, D.C. I'm now going to go soak my croaky voice. Bye now.